welcome to the Stiles Council, a podcast about the England national football team. We finally have some actual football to talk about this week, so we've put the player wall on ice because we've got 2 games to cover, and talking about Mark Wright's England career isn't really a priority at the moment. I'm Chris Nee, and I'll introduce David Hartrick by asking whether he'd feel ready to name a squad before a single minute more of football has been played.
I reckon I could name 3/4 of a squad.
Yeah. Well, Gareth Southgate's going to name this squad before the 2 friendlies prior to the World Cup, isn't he? Because he's going to name his 20, it's 30 with 7 reserves, isn't he? And they're going to know who's going, which is bold, and I like it.
Yeah, I'm quite happy with that at the moment. As we'll get onto Southgate, I'm still not banging the Southgate drum, but he is making a series of decisions you can't say are anything other than completely sensible, right, and forward thinking.
No, well, let's move on to some of them. We'll move straight into the 2 friendlies that have just been played, because despite them being friendlies, there's plenty to talk about, and a few cases for positivity in the Southgate conversation as well. Back on the 23rd of March, Friday evening, England played in Amsterdam against the Netherlands, won 1-0. And even though we weren't hugely negative about the squad, Dave, the starting lineup on paper looked pretty weak sauce.
Yeah, but I think it was very much a team that was picked to fit a system. This was very much a game that England had a game plan for that. This isn't by any stretch a great Holland side, but I would also go as far as to say that it is nowhere near as bad as some would tell you. I mean, the way some people were talking after that game was that, Holland they'd be getting beaten by League One sides. This is still a team, with really good attacking options. Strootman, Proper, Van Aanholt, Wijnaldum in midfield as midfield options, all very good. Van Dijk at the back. And England came into this game, and I think word of the day for me, Chris, was control, which is what England seemed to exert over the game from the very first minute.
They did, and it was very much playing to a system, and the system was fascinating in its own right, because we started with Joe Gomez and Kyle Walker either side of Stones at centre-back. And the Walker at centre-back discussion seems to have started and ended within these 2 friendlies, because he did so very well in that position. Trippier and Rose at wing-back. And that gave England a base to play a style of game where there was not a lot of dawdling on the ball. There was a load of life to our approach. And really, I thought England's attacking teeth kind of grew as the game went on, and it was all based on the fact that defensively, at least in the first half, we just never gave Holland an in.
No.
We seemed to win every second ball.
And an interesting aspect of this, I think, was how we played with that 5-man defence, really, which was where our midfielders were doing midfield busy work, but it was quite noticeable that they were looking to the defence, Stones, Maguire at times, to actually play the balls that break the lines, that ever so sexy football phrase, break the lines, and Walker to actually give them almost half of the midfield responsibility, and it worked. You could see, Lingard was getting the ball regularly from the defence and in positions where he could do things with it. And this is what England are going to look to do. I'm not saying it's going to be breathtakingly exciting, but what it is going to be is we're going to have a game plan, particularly when we play against better sides, and this is what we're going to look to do. Control it at the back, try and play. I wouldn't say it's not even playing on the break, is it, Chris? It's just it's trying to be more comfortable in possession. And you realise, as you say, when you look at that team on paper, fair enough, it's not it's not frightening in the way that a France team is, or a Brazil team is, or a Germany team is. But if we can be frightening in terms of how difficult it is to break us down longer term, then that can only be a positive thing.
Yeah, being difficult to break down is the starting point. And I think what was really exciting to me about the performance is that we look to play forwards. And those line-breaking passes from Walker and Maguire and Stones. Maguire came on early for Joe Gomez. They were finding midfielders' feet as early as possible. And actually the big difference I thought between some of Jordan Henderson's lesser England performances and this very good performance was the forward passing. And he was in there. He was finding feet as well. And the confidence on the ball and in possession to look up and find a pass 20, 30 yards in front of you means that England can get up the pitch very, very quickly. And it's not about breaking. It's about controlling possession through the passages of play. And it worked very well against a relatively poor Netherlands side by their historical standards. But I don't think that takes too much away from a decent England showing, really. The first half was maybe not dominant, but certainly controlling. I think that the first half an hour was a decent reminder that the players that we all kind of looked at in the starting lineup and raised an eyebrow, they're very competent footballers. And the thing that unites them is that they are all capable of knocking the ball around just fine. A couple of first half chances. Oxlade-Chamberlain had an early sighter on goal. Jordan Henderson, wasn't it, that headed just wide from Trippier's free kick in the first half as well. And it was in those moments that England's superiority really began to tell. It wasn't until the second half that we scored the goal. And it came after one or two exciting actual breaks. As soon as Holland started getting into the game, we were able to hit them. And England's pace on the counter when we are countering is quite something. Do you think England should have had a penalty before the goal, Dave?
We're going to talk about penalties too much as it is. But yeah, I think that's a penalty. I think that's a penalty. Yeah. I think it's far more a penalty than the other one we're going to discuss. But I think...
I agree. I think it was a coming together of Rashford with De Ligt and Zoet, the Dutch goalkeeper. And De Ligt fouled Rashford in the box. It was a cast iron in my book.
Yeah. And it really sort of reflected what England were doing at the time, which is that possession-based football, just keep probing and probing and probing and probing. And it's not, I'm not going to... There's no point us pretending it is edge-of-the-seat stuff. But what you're doing with a five-man defence is you're trying to make yourself more comfortable in possession, and you're trying to sit a little bit deeper to create holes and pockets further up the pitch to play your midfielders into. And the move that ended in the penalty incident and the move for the goal was exactly that. A relatively patient build-up and somebody switching the afterburners on at the appropriate moment with space to go into. And
Oxlade-Chamberlain in the case of the
goal. And it's the goal we scored is an excellent goal. There's no denying it. They knocked it round really well, and then Lingard finds himself in what is fast becoming a sort of very Jesse Lingard position, isn't it? Which is that 10 yards central outside of the penalty area. He keeps finding himself space in there, which is an incredibly handy weapon to have. And we spoke, I think it was last pod or a couple of pods ago, about having Lingard come off the bench and do this for England and stretch teams. He's absolutely a starter for me now, Chris.
Yeah, he made a lot of fans, I think, in the last a couple of appearances for England. His part in the goal before the final touch was impressive as well, because it was him who linked up with Oxlade-Chamberlain. It was 25 yards from goal, very, very comfortable. Didn't feel pressured at all, just pops it out to Danny Rose, and then finds himself in the perfect spot when the ball kind of popped back out to the edge of the box. Decent finish. I think the goalkeeper was unsighted. I think there's enough disguise on the shot to credit Lingard with that. But the performance that he's put in the last week has, I think, put him equal, if not slightly ahead of Dele Alli.
Yeah, well, we're recording this on a day where Spurs have played Chelsea, and Ali has perhaps had his best game in a Spurs shirt for a couple of months, and you do wonder if that competition is starting to tell, and he's starting to pull his socks up a bit. And that can only be, I mean, to have competition in any area of the pitch at international level is great, absolutely great. And the reality is, England don't have enough competition in defence and in midfield. In attack, if we can get some really good options pushing each other all the way, yeah, bring it on. And Lingard is now well in that. I mean, as we're both Football 365 readers, and the England ladder is fascinating reading. It's absolutely brilliant way to go about looking and assessing your squad options. And Lingard is now, I think he moved up to something like number 7. Something like that, and it's completely justified. It's like, well, yeah, he's absolutely in there. But I think before we move on, because we're going to keep things fairly tight, but I think it's worth pointing out that there was a lot of negativity around this Dutch side. They did on Monday go to Portugal and absolutely pick Portugal apart in their own backyard, and were 3-0 up by, I think they're 3-0 up by half time. And then close the game out 3-0. This isn't the mug side that some would have you believe. And England went there, controlled the game, stuck to the system. The subs, I thought as well, most of them had a reasonable impact, apart from Vardy, who famously didn't get a touch. But he didn't get a touch because England were closing the game out. There was quite an obvious sort of move in terms of game management and things we were trying from that point on, which I also thought was quite interesting, because it shows there is a level of intelligence going into the planning now. There is a level of understanding where we are, what our limitations are, and the jobs we may have to face in the World Cup. There may well be a game at some point against a better side where we do look to just close it out. Yeah. And there may be several games against worse sides where we look to close it out. But this is where we are. This is what we have to do, isn't it?
Yeah. We kept them to practically nothing. Yeah. There was that one little back heel from Bas Dost that was more or less a back pass for Pickford. And that was really it.
Yeah. I mean,
and that came just before the load of substitutions that I think took the sting out of the game a little bit, as well as England's game management.
Yeah, and we finished with slightly more possession. I think we got 52% possession, which, as we know these days, is a landslide. 52%.
Good.
But we finished, against a Dutch side away from home. I'd like to know the last time we finished with a higher percentage than the home team against a side who wasn't ranked, 20 odd places below us, etc. So it was positive. I can see why people aren't falling over themselves to praise England on the back of that, and neither are we, I think, Chris, it'd be fair to say, but it was an undeniably positive experience.
Yeah, it was positive, and there were positives within it, and I think the work of Rashford, Sterling and Lingard was one of those real positives.
It's just so rapid.
For Ali to come in and bolster that, and for Vardy to come in and on another day would have got a touch. But there are real options in the top half of the pitch, and they all seem to be working, clicking. Actually, Sterling and Lingard seem to be forging something of a partnership.
Yeah, I mean, on and off the pitch, which is good to see, because the happier players are off the pitch, the happier they'll be on it. Take it from anybody who had to watch the 2010 World Cup and the England squad there. But there's just, it doesn't matter how good a player is. One thing that will always frighten a defender, oldest cliche in the game, speed. And Rashford, Sterling, Lingard, Ali, when he comes on, there is some real pace in that attack. And with a couple of really lightning wing-backs as well. I like Trippier a lot. I think he's a really good player. And the ability to also switch in-game and push Walker out. That is, suddenly we've got some speed. And if we can marry that to that control we saw, then that's at least we're trying something. At least we have a methodology.
That was a story of the Holland game for me, was that we had that level of control and that ability to play on the ball without being negative, without playing it sideways. But then when we had the opportunity and they came onto us a little bit, we were breaking Rashford through to go and win what should have been a penalty. And we were using that pace as a real threat. And we have those options, and we've got the players who can do both. You know, they're not just speed merchants, those players up front who have that pace. They're real ballers as well. So it's a good sign of things to come, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth a quick contrast with 2014, when for all our pace, for all our speed, we were looking to Sterling. That was basically all we had up front pace-wise, because Kane's not the quickest striker in the world. Rooney certainly wasn't the quickest striker in the world. And you can see and feel the change. And that's, again, it's undeniable, really.
Yeah, and came through in the second friendly of the week as well. So last Tuesday we played against Italy at home, finished with a 1-1 draw, and it was a few changes to the team. We still had Sterling, we had Vardy in there obviously because we didn't have a great deal of options up front, and it was worth giving a proper striker a run out. Lingard was there, Oxlade-Chamberlain started again, and at the back end of the pitch, a change of goalkeeper. But Walker and Stones were in there from the start and joined by a debut for Tarkowski as well. Mixed reports, Dave. I thought he was a bit ropey in parts, but I've seen worse debuts.
Yeah, and I think a friendly against an Italy side who are very much playing for pride, having not qualified for the World Cup, having a lot of huge reputations that have taken a little bit of damage as a result of that. It's a big old stage to come and do that in a home game at Wembley under the lights, and I didn't think he did all right. I think he's very good on the ball, and not as good off the ball. I think it would be fair to say it's about concentration, but you know, debut game. He's very young. This has been massively a breakthrough season as well. Let's not pretend it hasn't. Yeah, acceptable debut for me.
Yeah, I thought so. And actually, it was John Stones early on that was starting to cause us a few problems.
I mean, John Stones is going to cost England at some point in a game that matters. We just have to accept that. But he is also going to have an 80 to 100 cap career. So it's just the way he is. He is in some games he is our best defender by miles, and in other games he looks a liability. But
and probably both.
And what he did do, I thought quite well, Chris, was that he weathered that early storm where, I mean, what was it? 3 mistakes, 3 quite big mistakes, 2 of which, you know, arguably should have cost us a goal. But he did come through that.
Yeah,
you know, he did come through, and he did start playing some decent football, which at least shows a sort of strength of mentality.
I don't want to give him too much credit for this either, but I do see it as a good thing that he was able to recover those situations himself. And it was his impact on Immobile that stopped those becoming real problems for us. It was interesting to see the huge early defensive hole that left him free in the first minute, because that wasn't just an individual error on the ball from Stones. That was Stones stepping up too late, trying to play him offside, which I find mildly concerning. We had our chances as well in the first half. Vardy was played through a couple of times. He should have done better with the first one, I think, and was cut off at the pass. he went through and had a shot blocked by Donnarumma just before he scored the goal. But when the goal arrived, Dave, it didn't look much, but it gives me so much encouragement for the summer because of the sharpness of the players involved.
I said on WhatsApp that just before he scored, I said it's great how England have a sort of plan A and a plan A and a half. And that plan A and a half is to work that ball to Vardy as quickly as possible because, again, his pace hurts defenders. And that goal, his goal, right, I'm going to talk about the other goal, Chris. I'm going to have to mention the West Brom goal, okay? Whether you like or hate Jamie Vardy, and I completely understand both points of view, what you can't deny is that technically, his game is absolutely on point at the moment. The goal against West Brom he scored recently, the ball dropping over the shoulder that he takes first time, I went on the record and I said to Chris and several other people, that's not only my favourite Premier League goal this season, it's my favourite Premier League goal for years, because as somebody who's played as a striker and I've been in those positions, the technical level there is like so high you just can't even believe. And I said to
to be fair to him, to catch that with your shin from that position is incredible. Yeah,
and I said to
no bite there.
No, I'm not biting. But to go to this game, he looks alive. He gets on there, and again, as soon as that ball is played in, I was thinking goal. I had absolutely no doubt whatsoever because you could see there's a thing about Vardy where he sniffs blood. You can see when he knows he's got that yard of pace. He knows he's got the defender, and as soon as he's in, there is an extreme level of confidence that goes into absolutely walloping in a finish like that. And he could go across the keeper there. He could for a bit more safety, but he doesn't. He gets the ball out his feet and he thinks, I'm going to hit this as hard as I possibly can and roof it. And it's a great goal. And I don't want to. He's not a better option than Harry Kane. Harry Kane is perhaps the best central striker in world football. But what a plan B England have. What a plan B.
Yeah, it was a great goal. It was a blistering finish. And I have absolutely no fears about him going and starting a World Cup for us. Because when you can do that, and I mean the movement as well as the finish, then you're going to be a handful for absolutely everybody. And again, Lingard was brilliant twice in the goal. He was the one who picked the ball off in midfield. Sterling then got fouled twice, and then Lingard took the quick free kick. And it was just superb, alive play all round from all three of them. And it is a real plus that we have players who can think that quickly and who can execute that. And it was just ruthless.
It also shows a level of understanding. It also shows that they things like that it's not even, you can't work on something like that on the training ground. You can't recreate that situation. So that situation comes about and that move comes about by that sort of semi-telepathic football understanding that some players have got and other players haven't. And again, this performance I thought was a bit stodgy, but there was a couple of moments like this within that gave me a real, do you know what? I'm more than happy with that. I'm more than happy with that. Whatever happens in the World Cup, this feels like progress. This feels like we are now starting to see not an England 2.0, but at least an England 1.1, which we haven't had for an awful long time.
There was a level of stodge to the performance.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, I kind of like how England just seemed to be moving through their World Cup preparations pretty calmly. That's just a vibe, really. I don't know that there's any actual evidence for that, but it seems to feel like everybody's just going through, getting ready.
It was
learning what they're doing, and it's quite sort of relaxed, isn't it, really, on the pitch as well as
a little air of please don't get injured, wasn't there, throughout?
Yeah, I suppose there was. There were two moments just before half-time that slightly made me question that. And the first one was Oxlade-Chamberlain getting yellow carded for absolutely walloping the ball away after giving away a foul. Yeah. Some excellent camera angles of that, if you can dig them out. Is that a red flag to you in any way, Dave?
I'm not a massive Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain fan. And I don't think he's the answer in midfield. I don't see this great Klopp-inspired turnaround. And little moments like that still make me look at him and think, yeah, you're still that player who's very good and very accomplished on the ball, but hasn't got it all upstairs. He's still those moments of where the intelligence just drops. And it's ridiculous to say it in a friendly or focus on it, really, but stuff like that in a World Cup, it costs you. A yellow card like that can kill you, can't it, Chris?
Yes, it can, and we should have had one just after it as well. Ashley Young, I think in a World Cup gets booked for the foul on Zappacosta out on the wing. Yeah, it was a heavy tackle.
Yeah, it was very much. I'd go further and say, if he wasn't playing at Wembley, to be perfectly honest with you, if he wasn't playing at Wembley for the home side. But I'm quite interested in your take on Young, because his club form has been undeniable this year. And when he came on against Holland, he didn't do much, but he certainly didn't do anything wrong. And he looked... What I liked was he looked really up for this. And I know that challenge was heavy, to say the least, but he looked bang up for this. He took this very, very seriously. He took this for what it was, which was an audition tape, essentially. And I thought he played really well. Really, really well. And again, he can cross a ball, and he can play a ball from deep with accuracy. So you look at our game plan and you go, well, yeah, that's another round peg in a round hole, really.
Yeah, it is a good option. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Ashley Young and have been for years. I never saw him becoming a left wing back, but I think he's doing an excellent job there for England as well as for Man United. And I think if it were down to the two of them, he would start ahead of Danny Rose for me, based on the two friendlies and the amount of football the two of them have played this season. So I think it's probably that makes it between him and Ryan Bertrand, and I think that's it, isn't it, option wise at left back?
And I think Bertrand is the future, but while Ashley Young is in this purple patch, he's in this. Some would claim he's approaching the form of his life. Then I think England have to use him appropriately, because do I think he's going to be there for the next Euros? No, and let's be honest, I hope he isn't, Chris. We should have better options at that point, but right now I don't think there's anyone better. But yeah, it was part of that stodge, I thought, was I don't think the defence here, maybe it was Tarkowski coming in, but there was definitely a slight shift in the balance. There was, as I said, Stones wobbles early on, and it took them a long while to settle. Whereas what we had in Holland, I thought, was a backline that sort of established themselves quite early on. Even with a substitution, they remained resolute doing what they were doing, and everybody grew in confidence from that. When you didn't have that early doors here, it didn't spread upwards, did it? It didn't go from one end of the team to the other.
No, not with the same fluidity, certainly. No. I think I've got it down as just about another positive performance, really, but the result didn't quite go our way. 3 minutes to the end, Italy scored their equalising goal through Insigne from the penalty spot. Dave, cast iron penalty, perfect use of
VAR? It just made me shake my head. As we have learned from various podcasts since and articles, this wording round a clear and obvious incident that needs to be referred is very, very muddy, to say the very least, because there appears to be a big enough backdoor built into every statement about it that they can essentially refer anything they want. He doesn't change his run. He doesn't look down at his feet. He doesn't make any movement towards the player. He doesn't, when he stands on his foot, he is not making a tackle, or he's not at the back end of a move for a tackle. He's not at the beginning. He's literally just running. And I am of the opinion that if you stand on somebody's foot in the penalty area, then 9 times out of 10, that is a penalty. But the 1 time out of 10 it isn't, is where you've got a player who is not looking at the other player. It's literally just you're either running across their line or you're running together, and it happens. You can't. It happens in 800 metres races, Chris, when runners are bunched together. It's not. I just think you look at that on VAR, and you go, well, yeah, I can completely understand why the penalty is given, because somebody has stood on somebody else's foot. But the problem is that the clinical nature of VAR means you're looking for an incident rather than suspecting one is there. So I'm not having for a second that they were looking at that stamp on the foot, because he's going down. Before that, they're looking at the first incident. They're looking to see why he's going down like he is. And he was diving. In the course of that dive, he gets his foot, somebody stands on his foot because they're running across his line. That to me is not a penalty. It shouldn't be referred to VAR unless you can sort of clarify, well, we're looking at the original incident. If you're looking at that original incident, you see it's a dive, you see there's nothing there, you then can't keep rolling the footage to look for an incident and go, well, okay, well, we'll look at that now. And then you can't look at that incident and say, well, we know there was no intent, there was no tackle being made, we know there was no positive action towards the other player's foot, but we're going to give the penalty anyway. It doesn't, just on common sense levels, it doesn't compute with me.
I'm going in on VAR on this one, Dave. There is a large contingent of otherwise sensible people who will swear blind that this is a foul, by which I mean the treading on the foot is a foul. Maybe I can accept that by the letter of the law it is, but in my world, as a 30-something football supporter, you don't give a penalty for that, no matter how much it hurts. And in fairness to Chiesa, dive or not, by the time he's been stamped on, that does hurt. But I just don't see that there's any movement whatsoever to initiate a foul. He's not gone for the ball, he's not tried to make a tackle, he's not trying to cut across Chiesa in any way. He is, as you rightly say, just running. And whatever the laws say, I want the spirit of that moment to rule in his favour, because he hasn't attempted to do anything, never mind foul somebody. And that's notwithstanding the fact that a decent part of the coming together resulted from the fact that Chiesa was falling, we'll generously call it. So in actual fact, Tarkowski is only partially responsible for the collision anyway. So I don't think it was a foul, and equally, I don't think the not giving of it as a foul can therefore be a clear and obvious error and be referred to VAR. So for me, this is yet another case of the VAR being used badly when it shouldn't be used at all, and making a decision badly. And that second part is a real problem in football at the minute, because the idea of VAR is that it looks at these incidents, whether or not they've been properly referred, for the sake of argument at the moment, and clears them up. And there have been far, far, far too many incidents where I've disagreed with the outcome of those decisions, just on the basis of the replays, which suggests that it's, at least in my mind, clearing up very little. Most irritating in this situation is that it was England's first goal conceded in nearly 6 matches.
Yeah.
That was a lovely little record to have, Dave, and it speaks well of the approach that Southgate's employed and of the defenders that he's put there.
Yeah.
And especially of Kyle Walker at the moment.
Yeah.
He's worth focusing on briefly, isn't he?
Yeah. He is doing a far less sexy job than he's being asked to do at his club side. But what he is being asked to do is to almost be 75% defender, 25% deeper line playmaker. But he is... you really sort of begin to understand his talent on the ball, and he was always an excellent player, but you can see that year playing in Man City's system has benefited him so much with the ball at his feet that now you completely trust him to do that job. And over the 2 games, I think you quite rightly said when you opened up about the England game, he answered a question that a few people were hoping to be able to ask afterwards. It so emphatically that the question just doesn't exist anymore.
In fact, it became fawning praise straight away. It was really interesting listening to 5 Live after the Italy game, and it was just glowing about both Walker and the decision to play him there.
Yeah.
So things are looking good for Walker to be starting, and he's very clear to say, I'll play wherever I want. I'll play wherever they ask me to play for England. I just want to be on the pitch.
Yeah.
But what it does then is really open up other options, and whether that's a nailed-on starting place for Trippier, whether it's a switch for Ashley Young to right back to accommodate him, which that in the Italy game was the first time I've seen him play at right back for a period. And it just allows us to maximise the use of those players without any detriment to the centre-back department, because he was really very good there. We'll just close it out. I've got one more question for you, Dave, and it's one that reflects back on our last show. Did anything change for you in the goalkeeping department over these 2 games?
No, not really. I think both keepers put in decent, competent performances under, let's be honest, not under a massive amount of stress. I thought Pickford, as I've mentioned before, I think Pickford's distribution is much better. And I think he's probably nudging ahead on that score, particularly if we play 5 at the back, because if you can have a keeper who is happy with the ball at his feet as well, that is very useful, particularly if he's also quite happy pinging it with one of those sort of side foot volleys up to a midfield player. So, but they weren't really stretched or tested in any way, Chris, I don't think. And I saw somebody saying that the penalty, if he'd have saved the penalty, that would have sealed his starting World Cup place. Well, no, it wouldn't, because any goalkeeper in the world can concede a penalty, and any goalkeeper in the world can save one. It's one aspect of the game I think it's almost impossible to judge a keeper on. So, no, not really. But what about you?
No, I'm the same. I think I prefer Pickford, and I think that is still the case now. And I'm still just about of the view that Butland might get the nod in the first game. That may have slightly changed. I wonder whether Gareth Southgate had a slight change over the past week or so, because I thought Pickford was decent. And I wonder whether the selection of him in the first game and Butland in the second was, subconsciously in the order in which they would play in the World Cup. I don't know. I would if I would have the goalkeeper who saved that penalty in my team for sure, because that was a proper pick that one out spot kick.
Yeah.
Go Gadget Arms is definitely playing in my team.
Yeah, but I think Pickford remains for me the more exciting choice. Butland slightly the safer option. But the one thing I do want to see is that I'd like to see one or both of them. I don't want to say playing for a better side, but next season they really need to be playing their club football somewhere where their job is not sort of part-time goalkeeper, part-time firefighter. And I think that was slightly evident in that there was a little bit of nervousness. There wasn't that confidence that comes from just winning games. That sort of that unquantifiable thing that some goalkeepers have. So that's a slight problem longer term. But yeah, it hadn't really changed my thinking.
No, it's that swagger, isn't it, that's missing? And I think the fact I think Clive Tilsley mentioned in commentary on the Italy game that both of them have conceded 50 goals this season. Yeah. So a lack of swagger is not really surprising. So I'm with you there. We'll end it there for this week. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to find us on the socials. We are actually out there now. We've recorded 6 before this, but this is the first one that's kind of going out into the world in its own right. You can find me at Chris M. Nee on Twitter. He's at David Hartrick. And you can follow Sphinx FTBL on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook.
See you there.